Hi guys, it's me, LoreLord, and you may notice in the title that this is a revisited video, because I have already made a video on the subject of the Skyrim Civil War, and why I believe the Stormcloaks to be the right side. But I wish to revisit that subject for two reasons. One, that video was made way back when I first started YouTube 2 years ago, and at the time I didn't know what I was doing, so the video isn't high quality. In fact, I'd say it's very low quality. And second, there were a lot of things in that video that should have been addressed, which I didn't. I really only addressed my singular argument in that video, and that argument alone I didn't address very well. And those are the reasons that I wish to revisit the subject, where I can make a better video, and also where I can address more points as well as better explain my main point. And therefore, this is an updated video as to why, after all this time, I still believe the Stormcloaks are the right side to side with in the Skyrim Civil War. So let's start off by talking about why the Stormcloak Rebellion is occurring in the first place. And this starts with the Great War. In the year 4th era, 171, after around 70 years of having almost no contact with the Empire, the Aldmeri Dominion sent an envoy to the Empire, who presented to the Emperor an ultimatum, and the most significant terms within said ultimatum were: A. Large tributes of gold were to be paid to the Aldmeri Dominion. B. The Blades were to be disbanded and made into an illegal organisation. C. Large amounts of territory within southern Hammerfell were to be annexed by the Aldmeri Dominion. And D. The worship of Talos was to be outlawed. And according to the source that I'm using for this, which is the book The Great War, that you can find in the game Skyrim, there were many other demands that were a part of the ultimatum as well, but it doesn't say what those demands were. For Tiber Septim, the choice was made clear by the ambassador: accept these terms, or face war from the Aldmeri Dominion. And Tiber Septim at first chose the latter. And when Titus Mede rejected these terms, the ambassador presented to the emperor the severed heads of all the blades that were captured and executed within the Aldmeri Dominion. And it was from that point that the Great War started, in which the Dominion invaded Hammerfell and Cyrodiil simultaneously, and even managed to take the imperial city itself in the year 174, but lost it again to the Empire in the following year in the Battle of the Red Ring. But speaking of the Battle of the Red Ring, this battle would be the last major battle of the war, because despite it being a decisive victory for the Empire, one that completely destroyed the Dominion invasion force in Cyrodiil, because most of it was stationed in the Imperial City due to an event called the Culling, shortly after the Emperor decided that the Empire could no longer fight this war. And so the Emperor requested a peace treaty, to which the Dominion accepted. The peace treaty to this war was known as the White Gold Concordat, and in it the Dominion had pretty much the same demands that they had with the ultimatum that they presented 4 years ago. The Blades were to be disbanded, Southern Hammerfell was to be annexed by the Dominion, and most importantly for this video, Thalmor worship was to be outlawed. And according to the Skyrim wiki page about the White Gold Concordat, the ultimatum term about the large tributes of gold was the only demand that wasn't also present in the White Gold Concordat. But in the in-game source, the Great War book, which I find to be a bit more reliable, not that Skyrim wiki is unreliable, but it's not as reliable as in-game sources. And anyway, in the book, I can't find anything to suggest that that term was removed in the White Gold Concordat, so I'm going to assume that this is one of the cases where the Skyrim wiki page is wrong, and say that the tributes of gold were also included in the White Gold Concordat, but I might be wrong, so take that last one with a grain of salt. So that is the background of the Great War. But what does it have to do with the Skyrim Civil War? Well, this is largely the reason the Stormcloak Rebellion is occurring in the first place. No matter how necessary the Emperor thought it to be to end the Great War, by signing the White Gold Concordat, the Empire betrayed its own people in 2 cases. One, it failed to protect the land of its inhabitants by surrendering land in Hammerfell to the Aldmeri Dominion. and it betrayed the very lives of the people in Skyrim by outlawing the worship of Talos. Because although most people in Tamriel follow the Imperial Pantheon at least to an extent, the worship of Talos specifically was especially ingrained in the culture of the Nords in Skyrim. And that's only half the story as to how the Empire betrayed Skyrim. The other half occurred after the Great War. I apologise, but this is another large section of a large amount of information. At first, although the Empire was required to ban the worship of Talos, at first the Dominion allowed the Empire to enforce this ban on its own terms, but this is how that quickly changed. In the year 4th Era 174, before the Great War itself ended, the Forsworn, who are the natives of the Reach in Skyrim, captured the Reach's capital city of Markarth. When the Great War ended, Ulfric Stormcloak returned home to Skyrim with his militia, and when he did, the Jarl of the Reach at the time, Jarl Hrolfdir, the father of the current Jarl Igmund, requested that Ulfric Stormcloak and his militia assisted in retaking Markarth, and Ulfric Stormcloak agreed on the condition that once Markarth was retaken, Talos worship was to be permitted. Hrolfdir agreed to this term, and in return, Ulfric besieged the city of Markarth and retook it. Sometime later, with Ulfric still present in Markarth, the Imperial Legion arrived to Markarth to re-garrison it after the Great War, but Ulfric refused the Imperial Legion entry to Markarth and said that he would only allow them entry in Markarth if they agreed to the same term, that Talos worship was to be permitted. And despite the ban, the Legion agreed to this term, but attempted to do so discreetly so that the Thalmor didn't discover that Talos worship was being freely practiced. But despite their efforts, in time the Thalmor did discover that this was happening, and when they did, they demanded that A. Ulfric Stormcloak was to be banished from Markarth, along with his militia that helped retake Markarth, and B. that it was now the Thalmor, not the Empire themselves, that would enforce the Talos ban. And not wanting another Great War, both Jarl Hrolfdir of the Reach and the Empire agreed to these terms. And once again, this is how the Empire has wronged the people of Skyrim. As the governing body of Skyrim, their purpose is to protect its citizens. Instead, however, they are turning a blind eye to the persecution of its Nord people. So my main reason as to why Skyrim has the right to succeed is because the Empire is proving itself to be not fit to rule Skyrim, because it is not fulfilling one of the main purposes that a government has, to protect its citizens. So now that we finish the extremely complicated explanation of my primary reason as to why the Stormcloaks are right for trying to get Skyrim to succeed, I shall now list off all my secondary reasons, which are much shorter and do not require anywhere near as much nuance. Starting off with somewhat my second main reason, which doesn't require any nuance because I've already given all of it, that argument being that the Empire is a de facto puppet state of the Aldemeri Dominion. And again, I don't think I need to elaborate on that. Regardless as to who you side on, that is objectively the case. And the Nordic people of Skyrim are a very proud people who believe respect is earned, not forced from them. And not to mention that once again, almost all of them are Talos worshippers. Needless to say, by remaining a part of the Empire, they would remain a part of this puppet state, and again, needless to say, the Nords have plenty of reason to not want this. So that's the end of that argument, which somewhat relates to my next argument. That argument being that the Empire is abusing Skyrim's resources. Skyrim is impoverished to pay the debts of an empire too weak to rule them. Literally, as in paying the tributes towards the Aldemeri Dominion, as is likely a result of the White Gold Concordat, and paying for reparation expenses, and for both of those cases, Skyrim is paying the debts via their taxes to the Empire, and that phrase can also be taken figuratively because Skyrim is required to pay the Empire in other ways. Once again, it uses its taxes to pay the Empire monetarily, except this can simply mean to fund the Empire in general. It can be related to how Skyrim had provided men to the Empire to fight in the Great War, and still does provide men for its militaries. And it can relate to the Empire's usage of Skyrim's natural resources, like the steel in the Reach. And the examples go on. But the point is that Skyrim is using its own resources to fund the Empire, which wouldn't be a problem if the Empire, in turn, fulfilled its purposes as a government, because that's exactly why people pay the government taxes, to protect them and to provide them with their needs that couldn't otherwise be provided by the market economy. And as we've established, the Empire isn't doing that. It's not even doing the most basic purpose of the government, which is protecting its citizens. So in short, the Empire is using the resources of Skyrim to fund its own needs and is not providing what it's supposed to in return. And so those are all the secondary arguments that I will talk about in this video. I'm sure there are many other arguments that could be used to argue in favour of the Stormcloaks, but I believe I have now provided enough. Now, what I was previously planning on doing was spending the remainder of this video listing off commonly used arguments against the Stormcloak Rebellion and refuting them. However, I've changed my mind because many of the arguments against the Stormcloak cause are very complex subjects that I believe deserve videos of their own. And if you look through my channel, you will see that I have already made videos about arguments used against the Stormcloak cause. For example, I made a video explaining why Ulfric isn't just looking for power, and in time I will make more videos for more arguments used against them. But in the meantime, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Feel free to let me know in the comment section whether you agree or disagree, and feel free to let me know why, given that you do so respectfully, and I will see you guys in the next one.